I stopped eating lunch in the crypt 3 months ago, but I still can't explain why. My name is Lucia Vega, and I have worked as a caretaker at the monastery of San Felipe Ossuary in Querétaro, Mexico, for 7 years. In that time, I've cataloged over 2,000 skulls, cleaned every shelf in the underground chambers, and learned to find peace in the silence of bones. The work is meditative, respectful. I dust each skull carefully, check for degradation, maintain the humidity levels. Tourists come during the day, take their photographs, leave their flowers. After they're gone, it's just me and the dead. The skull appeared on the 7th shelf during my 2nd year. I don't remember it being there before, but the records showed it had been accessioned in 1973. No name, just a catalog number, SF0741. Adult male, estimated death in the early 1800s. Nothing unusual in the paperwork, but the skull itself, it always faced forward. Every other skull on that shelf was positioned in profile, the way Brother Miguel had arranged them decades ago. Left side facing out, creating a uniform display. It's more visually appealing that way, he'd told me once, more respectful. But SF0741 stared straight ahead, empty sockets facing the walkway where visitors passed. The first time I noticed, I assumed someone had bumped it. Tourists aren't supposed to touch anything, but rules don't always stop people. I turned it gently, repositioning it to match the others. The bone felt normal under my gloved hands. Cool, slightly porous. I logged the adjustment in my daily notes and moved on. The next morning, it faced forward again. I repositioned it. By evening, it had turned back. I started checking it multiple times per day. Morning, lunch, before closing. Each time I found it facing forward, I'd rotate it back into profile. The movement was subtle, maybe 30 degrees, maybe 45, but it was consistent. I mentioned it to Brother Miguel during our weekly meeting. He's 82 now, mostly retired, but he still visits the ossuary on Wednesdays. He listened quietly as I explained, then shrugged. The shelves shift, he said. Temperature changes, the wood settles, bones move. But bones don't move in the same direction every time. I started documenting it. Photographs, timestamps, measurements. I used a small piece of tape on the shelf to mark the exact angle. Every morning at 9, the skull faced forward. Every time I corrected it, it returned. I checked the shelf for vibrations, air currents, structural issues. Nothing. The 7th shelf was solid, level, unchanged since its installation in 1968. After 2 months of this, I installed a security camera. Small, discreet, positioned to capture just that section of shelf. I didn't tell Brother Miguel. I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted to see. The footage showed exactly what I feared. During my lunch break, 12:15 to 12:45, when I sat in the courtyard above and ate my torta, the skull rotated. Slowly, deliberately. One smooth movement, turning from profile to forward facing. No vibration, no external force. Just bone moving against wood, pivoting on its own base until those empty sockets stared directly at the camera. I watched the footage 7 times, then I deleted it. I should have reported it. Should have shown someone. But what would I say? That a 200-year-old skull was moving on its own? That the dead were watching me work? Instead, I stopped fighting it. For 3 weeks, everything seemed normal. I dusted the shelves, updated the catalog, led the occasional tour group. The skull stayed in position, staring at nothing, and I avoided looking directly at it. When I had to clean that section, I worked quickly, efficiently, eyes on my cloth and not on the bone. Then I found the dirt. It was a Thursday. Morning light filtered through the high windows, illuminating dust particles in the air. I was polishing the brass placard beneath the seventh shelf when I noticed it, a small pile of dirt, dark and slightly damp, directly under SF0741. I crouched down, studying it. Fresh soil, not the dry dust that accumulated in corners, but actual earth. The kind that clings to shoes after rain, the kind that comes from open ground. There had been no rain in 3 weeks. The crypt is sealed, climate controlled. No one walks through dirt to get here. I looked up at the skull, at the space beneath its jaw where the mandible would have connected. Caught in the ridge of bone, barely visible, was a dark smear. I took a sample swab, my hands shaking slightly, and sealed it in a bag. That night, I had the soil analyzed by a friend who works in the university's archaeology department. He called me 2 days later. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was strange. "Careful. Does it matter? Lucia, this soil, it's from an active burial site. The mineral composition, the decomposition markers, this dirt has been in contact with human remains, recent ones, within the last month." I thanked him and hung up. The skulls in our ossuary are centuries old. The monastery grounds haven't held a burial since 1947. The nearest active cemetery is 4 kilometers away. I returned to the crypt the next morning. The dirt was gone, either swept away by the night custodian or by something else. I checked the footage from the previous night, but the file was corrupted, just static and darkness. SF0741 still faced forward. I clean around it now. I maintain the other shelves, catalog new acquisitions, give my tours, but I don't touch the 7th shelf anymore. Brother Miguel hasn't asked why. Maybe he knows. Maybe he's always known. Sometimes, when I'm working in the back chambers and the ossuary is empty, I hear it, a soft sound, like fingernails scraping against wood, like something digging. I don't go investigate. I just finish my work and leave. Last week, I noticed something new. Another skull, 3 spaces down from SF0741, has started to turn, just slightly. Just enough that by the end of my shift, it faces forward too. I'm looking for a new job. Something above ground. Something with the living. But I know I won't leave. Because someone has to watch them. Someone has to keep count. And someone has to remember that SF0741 wasn't always alone on the 7th shelf. Now there are 2 skulls facing forward. By next month, there might be 3. The crack grows 3 millimeters every month, and I measure it like my life depends on it. My name is Vincent Carr, and I have served as ossuary keeper at St. Jerome's Catacombs in Prague for 11 years. Most days, my work is quiet and methodical. I catalog remains, maintain environmental controls, conduct historical research for visiting scholars. The catacombs hold over 1,200 skulls, each with its own story, its own silent history. I know every shelf, every marker, every fragment of bone. I thought I knew them all completely, until I noticed the crack in row 14, column C. It's a simple hairline fracture, running from the left temple down toward the orbital socket. the kind of damage you'd expect from age, from centuries of settling and shifting. When I first documented it during a routine inspection 4 years ago, I measured it at zero point 0.7 centimeters. Standard protocol. I photographed it, logged it in the database, noted no immediate conservation concerns. 3 months later, during my quarterly assessment, I measured it again, 1 centimeter. I assumed I'd made an error in my initial measurement. These things happen. Lighting changes, angles shift, human error compounds. I updated the record and thought nothing more of it. But the crack kept growing. Every month, without fail, I'd measure row 14, column C. The skull sits in the middle section, eye level, easily accessible. Adult male, estimated death in 1847 based on the burial registry. No name recorded, just a number, J347. The crack expanded in a perfectly straight line, moving down the bone with geometric precision. After 18 months of measurements, I had documented growth from 0.7 centimeters to 2.3 centimeters. The progression was unnaturally consistent. Exactly 3 millimeters per month, not 2.9, not 3.1, exactly 3. I consulted with Dr. Horokova, the lead conservator at the National Museum. She examined my documentation, reviewed the photographs, ran her own analysis, environmental factors. She concluded, humidity fluctuations, temperature variations. The bone is simply deteriorating at a steady rate. But our climate control systems are precise. Temperature stays constant at 16 degrees Celsius. Humidity at 55%. Nothing fluctuates. I began visiting row 14, column C, every day. Not just to measure, though I did that religiously, but to observe, to watch. The skull itself showed no other signs of deterioration. No discoloration, no structural weakness, no additional cracks. Just this one line, extending slowly, inevitably downward. On the 2-year anniversary of my first measurement, the crack reached the orbital socket. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the precision of it, the geometric impossibility. Bone doesn't crack in straight lines. It fractures along stress points, follows natural weaknesses in the structure. But this crack was surgical, perfect, wrong. The next morning, I filed a formal request to access the burial archives. St. Jerome's keeps meticulous records dating back to the 1500s. If J347 had a story, I wanted to know it. It took 3 weeks to locate the original burial entry. The handwriting was archaic. The ink faded to brown, but the details were clear enough. Johann Weiss, 34 years old, died October 19th, 1847. Cause of death, live burial. I read the entry 7 times, searching for any mention of how they knew. Live burial was rare, but not unheard of in that era. Catalepsy, coma, misdiagnosis, people were occasionally interred before death. But usually, there was no confirmation, just suspicion, family rumors, terrible uncertainty. Johann Weiss's case was different. They'd exhumed him 3 days after burial, following reports of sounds from the grave. When they opened the coffin, they found evidence of struggle. Scratch marks on the interior lid, splinters embedded in his fingertips, and a fractured skull, the result of him repeatedly striking his head against the coffin in desperate attempts to escape. The location of the fracture, left temple, extending toward the orbital socket. I brought the documentation to Father Tomasz, who oversees the catacombs. He read the burial record slowly, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't identify. How long has the crack been growing? 4 years, 3 millimeters per month. He placed his hand on the document. Some deaths don't end when the body stops breathing, he said quietly. Some people keep dying, over and over. It had grown exactly 3 millimeters the next month. It always has. I've tried everything to stop it. I've moved the skull to different locations, different shelves, different rooms, even off-site to the conservation laboratory. The crack continues. I've consulted with forensic anthropologists, structural engineers, physicists. No one can explain the consistent growth rate. No environmental factor, no natural process can account for it. Last month, I noticed something new. The crack has developed smaller fractures branching off from the main line. Tiny hairline splits, radiating outward like the pattern you'd see if someone struck bone repeatedly against a hard surface. Like fingernail scratches, like desperate, frantic clawing. I measure them too. Now, they're growing at the same rate, 3 millimeters per month. 2 weeks ago, a visiting researcher asked to photograph row 14, column C. I positioned the skull carefully and handed her the camera. She lowered it, her face pale. She didn't return. I've started having dreams. In them, I'm in darkness, pressing my palms against rough wood. I can hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow, feel the coffin walls inches from my face. I push upward, but there's no give, just solid earth above, pressing down, crushing. I open my mouth to scream, and dirt pours in. I wake with the taste of soil on my tongue. The crack has now reached the zygomatic bone. In 3 months, it will connect to the mandible. In my nightmares, I know what happens then. The jaw will separate, the skull will open, and some echo of Johann Weiss's final moments will finally escape. I don't know what I'll do when that day comes. For now, I measure, I document, I watch row 14, column C, with a devotion that borders on obsession. Every morning at 9, I'm there with my calipers, my camera, my notebook. 3 millimeters. Always 3 millimeters. Yesterday, I noticed something that broke my clinical detachment completely. Inside the crack, barely visible even with magnification, there's a residue, dark, organic. I collected a sample, tested it against protocols I'm not supposed to use without authorization. It's blood, fresh, less than 72 hours old. The skull is over 170 years old, but something inside it is still bleeding, still dying, still trying to break free. I've counted the skulls 1,083 times, and the number is always wrong on foggy nights. My name is Felix Durand, and I have worked as night watchman at the Cimetière de l'Est Ossuary in Lyon, France, for 9 years. The job is simple. Patrol the grounds, monitor the security systems, ensure the crypts remain sealed and undisturbed. From midnight to 8 in the morning, the dead are my only company. I've grown comfortable with the silence, with the weight of centuries pressing down through limestone and bone. The counting started as a way to stay awake during the long hours. The ossuary contains exactly 1,847 skulls, arranged on floor-to-ceiling shelves in the main vault. I counted them all during my first month, working systematically from left to right, top to bottom, logging each row in a worn notebook I keep in my coat pocket. When I reached skull 1,847, I felt a small sense of accomplishment, order, certainty, numbers that added up. Now I count them every shift, not because I need to, but because I need to know. Most nights, the total is correct, 1,847. I mark it in my log, sign my initials, continue my rounds. The ritual is meditative, grounding, count, record, patrol. The rhythm keeps me alert, keeps my mind occupied during the dead hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the world feels most abandoned. But on foggy nights, those heavy, thick fogs that roll in from the Rhone and settle over the cemetery like a burial shroud, the count changes. 1,848. The first time it happened, I assumed I'd miscounted. Fog disorients perception, makes distances uncertain, turns familiar spaces strange. I started over, moving more slowly, double-checking each shelf, but the number held, 1,848, one extra skull, somewhere in the vault. I searched for 3 hours that night. I photographed every shelf, compared them against my archive images, looked for any displacement or addition. Nothing appeared different. Every skull was in its proper position. Every catalog number matched, but my count came to 1,848. By morning, when the fog lifted, I counted again. 1,847. I told myself it was exhaustion. But the next time, fog settled over the cemetery. 3 weeks later, I counted 1,848 again. For the first 2 years, I tried to identify the extra skull. I developed a grid system, divided the vault into sections, counted each quadrant separately during foggy nights. The discrepancy moved. Sometimes the extra skull appeared in the upper left section, sometimes in the lower right, sometimes in the center rows. It was never in the same location twice. I started marking skulls with tiny adhesive dots, invisible unless you knew where to look. Red dot for row 1, blue for row 2, green for row 3. A cataloging system that existed only for me. On clear nights, every dot remained in position. On foggy nights, I'd find an unmarked skull among the marked ones, one that didn't belong to any of my color-coded rows. By the 3rd year, I stopped trying to find it. I just counted, logged the discrepancy, and waited for morning to restore order. Then, last winter, I found the muddy skull. It was December 7th, a Saturday. Heavy fog had persisted for 3 days, unusual even for Lyon. I'd counted 1,848 skulls every night, watched the number stubbornly refuse to correct. On the morning of the 7th, I arrived for my shift at 11:50 p.m. and found it lying on the stone floor just inside the ossuary entrance. A human skull, covered in fresh mud. Not the dry dust of the crypt, not the limestone residue that sometimes flakes from the walls, wet, dark earth, the kind that clings to recently disturbed graves, the kind that smells of rain and decomposition. I crouched beside it, studying the bone in the beam of my flashlight. Adult, male, probably. No obvious marks or damage, no catalog number, no identification tag. Just mud-caked bones sitting where no skull should be. I photographed it from every angle. I measured it. I documented its exact position. Then I compared it against every skull in the vault, searching for any gap, any empty space where it might have originated. Nothing. All 1,847 accounted for, all in their designated positions. The muddy skull was the 1,848th. I didn't touch it. I locked the crypt, called the cemetery director, and waited in my security office for sunrise. When Director Masson arrived at 7 in the morning, I showed him the photographs, explained the situation. We returned to the crypt together. The skull was gone. No mud on the floor, no trace it had ever been there. Just clean stone and 1,847 skulls in perfect arrangement. Masson looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Concern, maybe, or recognition. Every night for 9 years, and on foggy nights, always 1,848. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. My predecessor told me about this 30 years ago, before the ossuary was properly sealed. They found an unmarked grave during expansion work, very old, pre-revolution. The remains had been buried without ceremony, without record, just a body thrown into unconsecrated ground. What happened to it? They moved it here, added the skull to the collection, but they never logged it, never gave it a number, just placed it among the others and pretended it had always belonged. Which shelf? No one knows. It was 40 years ago. The workers who did it are dead. The records were never updated. For all purposes, it doesn't exist, except on foggy nights. Masson placed his hand on my shoulder. Count them if you need to, but don't try to find it. Some things want to be forgotten. I've followed his advice. 3 years have passed since that conversation. The pattern continues. Clear nights, 1,847. Foggy nights, 1,848. I count, I log, I don't investigate. But last week, something changed. During a particularly dense fog, I counted 1,849. I recounted immediately. Same result. 2 extra skulls now. 2 unmarked, unrecorded, impossible additions. I thought about searching, about photographing every skull, comparing against my archives, identifying which 2 didn't belong. But I remembered Masson's warning. Some things want to be forgotten. Instead, I'm watching the weather forecasts, monitoring fog patterns, preparing for the next misty night when I'll count again and learn whether the number has grown. Because I've started to understand something terrible. The fog doesn't reveal extra skulls. It reveals the skulls that were always there. The forgotten ones, the unrecorded ones. The bodies buried without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without anyone to remember their names. The ossuary officially holds 1,847 skulls. But on foggy nights, when the boundary between recorded and forgotten grows thin, I count how many the dead say should be here. Last night was clear. I counted 1,847. Tonight, fog is rolling in from the river. I'm sitting in my office, notebook open, pencil ready. In 30 minutes, I'll enter the crypt and begin counting. I'll mark each skull, tally each row, reach the final shelf, and I'll write down whatever number the dead decide to show me. Tomorrow morning, when the fog lifts, maybe it will be 1,847 again. Or maybe the forgotten ones have decided to stop hiding. Maybe, eventually, the number will stop changing at all. Because once you're counted, once you're acknowledged, maybe you finally get to rest. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake during clear nights, maybe being counted is just the beginning. I stopped working alone in the archive after I found the rosary beads arranged in a noose. My name is Sister Maria Castellano, and I have served as archivist at the Convento de Santa Clara in Salamanca, Spain for 14 years. My work involves maintaining the monastery's extensive collection of historical documents and, more recently, cataloging the remains housed in our ossuary chapel. Among those remains is a skull I've come to know too well. Brother Thomas Salazar died 1702, whose jaw is positioned in what appears to be a smile. The position is anatomically unusual. Mandibles typically rest in neutral alignment or hang slightly open after the soft tissue decomposes. Brother Thomas's jaw sits at an angle that draws the teeth into a visible expression, not quite a grin, but close enough to disturb. When I first took inventory of the ossuary 3 years ago, I noted the anomaly in my records. Skull exhibits unusual mandibular position, possibly result of postmortem manipulation or burial positioning. Clinical, detached, professional, but I noticed it every time I entered the chapel. That subtle curve, those exposed teeth, the way the empty sockets seemed positioned to accommodate eyes that would have crinkled with the expression. 6 months into my work, I began to suspect the angle was changing. I dismissed it initially as a trick of lighting. The chapel has narrow windows, and the sun moves across them throughout the day, creating shadows that shift and deepen. What looked like a slight smile in morning light might appear broader at noon, narrower in evening. Perception, not reality. But I'm trained in observational documentation. I started photographing Brother Thomas's skull weekly. Same angle, same lighting conditions, same distance. I filed the images chronologically, comparing them against each other with increasing unease. The changes were subtle, a millimeter shift here, a slight rotation there, but they were present, measurable, real. Some mornings, the expression was barely noticeable, a neutral arrangement of bone that happened to suggest a faint upward curve. On those days, I could work in the chapel without distraction, cataloging burial records and maintaining the environmental controls. Other mornings, the teeth were fully bared, the jaw angled sharply upward, creating an unmistakable grin. Not a peaceful smile, not the serene expression you might imagine on a man of God. Something else, something knowing, something that made me avoid looking directly at that particular shelf while I worked. I consulted with Father Esteban, who oversees the monastery. He's 81, has lived here for 57 years, knew men who had known men who remembered Brother Thomas. I showed him my photographic documentation, the measurements I'd taken, the timeline of changes. He studied the images for a long time before speaking. Thomas was a difficult man, he said finally. Brilliant theologian, but troubled. He questioned everything: doctrine, authority, the nature of salvation itself. The older brothers tolerated it because of his intellectual gifts, but there were concerns. What kind of concerns? That his questions weren't academic, that he was searching for answers the church couldn't provide, that he'd found them somewhere else. What does that mean? Father Esteban closed the folder of photographs. Brother Thomas died during Lent, alone in his cell. The official record says natural causes, but there were rumors, whispers about symbols drawn on his walls, prayers recited backward, experiments with consciousness and the boundary between life and death. You think he was practicing something forbidden? I think he was obsessed with persistence, with what remains when the body fails, with whether death is truly an ending or simply a transformation. He returned the folder to me. Watch him carefully, sister. Document everything, but don't work in that chapel alone. I followed his advice for 2 months. I scheduled my archival work during afternoon hours when other sisters were present in adjacent rooms. I maintained my photographic records, logged every change, kept my observations clinical and precise. Then I found the rosary beads. It was a Thursday in October. I'd arrived early 6 in the morning before dawn prayers to complete an urgent cataloging request from the diocesan archives. The chapel was dark except for my work lamp, the kind of thick darkness that exists only in stone buildings with minimal windows. I was organizing materials on the work table when I noticed them, a set of rosary beads, arranged in a perfect circle on the table's surface, the crucifix positioned at the top, the beads forming a loop, a noose. I knew every item in the chapel, inventoried, cataloged, documented. These beads weren't part of our collection. They were old, wooden, worn smooth from use, but I'd never seen them before. I photographed them before touching anything. Then I picked them up carefully, examining each bead, each knot in the cord. The crucifix was unusual. Hand-carved, inverted, the Christ figure facing downward instead of up. Brother Thomas's skull grinned at me from its shelf. I'm certain of this because I looked directly at it for the first time in weeks, and the jaw was positioned at its maximum angle, teeth fully exposed, the expression unmistakable. I left the chapel immediately. I found Father Esteban at morning prayers and showed him the beads. His face went pale. Where did you find these? On my work table, arranged in a circle. This is Thomas's rosary. We buried it with him. It should be in his grave. Are you certain? He turned the crucifix over, showing me an inscription on the back. T.S. Memento Mori. Thomas Salazar. Remember you must die. We need to check his burial site, I said. We went to the monastery cemetery that afternoon. Brother Thomas's grave was in the oldest section, marked by a simple stone with his name and dates. The ground showed no signs of disturbance, no evidence of digging or exhumation. Father Esteban blessed the grave and recited prayers of protection. I stood beside him, holding the rosary beads, trying to understand how they traveled from sealed ground to the chapel table. We returned the beads to diocesan authorities. They agreed to investigate. 3 weeks later, they sent a formal response. The beads were consistent with early 18th century construction, but carbon dating was inconclusive. No explanation for their appearance, no recommendation for action. I haven't worked alone in the chapel since, but I still maintain my photographic documentation, still measure the angle of Brother Thomas's jaw, still log every change. The grin comes and goes. Some weeks it's subtle, some weeks it's pronounced. There's no pattern I can identify, no correlation with moon phases, weather, or religious calendar. Just irregular shifts between neutral and actively disturbing. Last month, I noticed something new. The skull has started to turn, not the jaw, the entire skull. Fractional rotations on its shelf, changing the direction those empty sockets face. Previously, Brother Thomas looked toward the chapel entrance. Now, gradually, he's turning toward my work table. I've measured it, documented it, photographed it from every angle, 3 degrees per week, consistently, precisely. At this rate, he'll be facing my chair directly in 7 weeks. I've requested a transfer to a different archive, a different monastery, somewhere without an ossuary, without bones, without dead men who smile and turn and leave their rosaries arranged like instruments of execution. The request is under consideration. In the meantime, I work during daylight hours only. I keep the chapel door open. I never turn my back to the shelf where Brother Thomas rests. And I've stopped taking photographs because the last image I captured showed something I can't explain, something I've shown no one, something that keeps me awake during the hours when the monastery is silent. In the photograph, taken with flash and dim morning light, there's a reflection in the polished surface of my work table. Brother Thomas's skull, perfectly clear. But the mandible isn't positioned in a grin. It's open, wide open, as if Brother Thomas is laughing, or screaming, or trying to speak words that have been waiting 323 years to be heard. The humming was on the audio feed, and that's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. My name is Jude Morrison, and I have worked as a restoration technician at All Saints Memorial Ossuary in Edinburgh, Scotland, for 6 years. My primary responsibility is maintaining the physical integrity of the skeletal remains, cleaning, stabilizing, preventing degradation. It's meticulous work, requiring patience and steady hands. I've restored hundreds of specimens, from medieval monks to Victorian-era paupers. But the children's section is different. The children's shelf holds 43 small skulls, arranged by size from left to right. Infants, toddlers, children up to perhaps 10 years old. Most died in the 1800s, victims of scarlet fever, typhoid, accidents. A few are older, dating back to the 1600s. Each one is cataloged with whatever information survived names when available, estimated ages, dates of death. I clean them every third Thursday. It's delicate work. Children's bones are fragile, more porous than adult specimens, prone to deterioration. I use soft brushes, distilled water, occasionally specialized solutions for stubborn calcification. The process takes approximately 4 hours to complete all 43. I've always found it peaceful. Sad, yes, but peaceful. These children died centuries ago. Their suffering ended long before I was born. Cleaning their remains feels like a final kindness, a way of acknowledging they existed, they mattered. Then, 3 months ago, I heard the humming. It was faint, so faint I thought it might be the building's ventilation system, or perhaps sound carrying from the street through the old stone walls. A soft, rhythmic sound, musical. I paused, brush suspended over a small skull catalog, number C. 17. Female child, approximately 3 years old, died 1856. The humming continued. I looked around the restoration room, empty except for me and the bones. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I resumed work. The humming faded. Over the next month, I heard it 3 more times. Always when working on the children's shelf. Always the same gentle, wordless melody. I mentioned it to Dr. MacLeod, the chief conservator. She suggested tinnitus, acoustic anomalies in the vaulted ceiling, psychological projection, all reasonable explanations. But I knew what I heard. I started bringing a digital recorder to my Thursday sessions. If the humming was real, if it had a source, I wanted documentation. For 4 weeks, I recorded every minute of my work. The playback showed only ambient sound, my breathing, the soft scrape of brushes against bone, distant traffic. Then, on the 5th week, I heard it again. I was cleaning C, 23 male child, approximately 5 years old, died 1837. The skull was particularly delicate, showing signs of disease-related degradation. I worked carefully, using minimal pressure, when the humming began. I didn't move, didn't acknowledge it, just kept working, kept the recorder running, focused on maintaining steady breathing. The melody lasted 43 seconds. I counted. When I reviewed the audio that night, I heard it. The frequency analysis showed it wasn't environmental noise, wasn't mechanical interference. It was a human voice, young, female, probably. I brought the recording to Dr. McLeod the next morning. She listened 3 times, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Where exactly were you when this was recorded? The restoration room, working on the children's section. Which specimen? C23. The 5-year-old boy. She made a note in her ledger. Continue your normal procedures, but add video documentation. I want to see if there's any correlation between the sound and physical movement. The following Thursday, I set up a camera, positioned it to capture the entire children's shelf and my workspace. High definition, sensitive microphone, continuous recording. I worked methodically through the first 20 specimens. No humming, no anomalies, just quiet, focused conservation work. Then I reached C31 female child, approximately 18 months old, died 1844. As I lifted the skull to examine the occipital bone, the humming started. This time, it was louder, not drastically, but noticeably, close enough that I could distinguish variations in pitch, could recognize the melody structure. Still wordless, still gentle, but present in a way that made my hands shake slightly. I glanced at the camera. The recording light blinked steadily. Whatever this was, it would be documented. The humming continued for 2 minutes, long enough that I completed the basic cleaning, returned C31 to its position, and moved to C32. As soon as I set down the previous skull and picked up the next, the sound stopped. I reviewed the footage that evening in Dr. McLeod's office. We watched in silence as I worked, listened as the humming began, clear, undeniable. A child's voice singing a lullaby in an empty room. But the video showed something else, something I hadn't noticed while working. At the exact moment the humming started, C31 shifted position on its shelf, just slightly, perhaps 3 inches, moving closer to the shelf's edge. I hadn't touched it. My hands were visible in the frame, holding a brush, nowhere near the skull. But it moved, slid forward smoothly, deliberately, as if drawn by invisible hands. Dr. McLeod replayed the segment 5 times. Environmental vibration, she suggested, but her voice carried no conviction. The other skulls didn't move, just C31. She closed her laptop. I'm bringing in a structural engineer and a physicist. We need to rule out all natural explanations before we consider. She trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. The engineer found nothing. No vibrations, no settling, no structural issues that could account for movement. The physicist detected no electromagnetic anomalies, no environmental factors. 2 weeks later, I returned to my Thursday cleaning. This time, Dr. McLeod observed. I worked through the specimens systematically. C1 through C30, no incidents. Then I picked up C31. The humming began immediately. Louder than before, clear enough that Dr. McLeod flinched. And C31 moved again. This time, it rotated slightly on its base, those empty sockets turning to face me directly. Dr. McLeod made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like a sharp intake of breath. "Put it down," she said quietly. I returned C31 to its shelf. The humming stopped. The skull settled into position, facing forward again. We reviewed the video later. Same result. Movement during humming. Cessation when I released contact with the skull. Dr. McLeod contacted specialists, parapsychologists, historians, theologians. The responses varied from skepticism to concern, but no one offered a definitive explanation. I've continued my work. I still clean the children's shelf every third Thursday. But now, when I reach C31, I work quickly, efficiently. I don't make eye contact with those empty sockets. I don't acknowledge the humming because I've learned something in the past month, something I haven't shared with Dr. McLeod or anyone else. The melody is getting longer. That first time, it lasted 43 seconds. Now it's over 3 minutes, and I've started to recognize elements of it. Fragments of what might be actual lullabies, Scottish folk songs, nursery rhymes, half-remembered tunes from centuries past. Last Thursday, for the first time, I thought I heard words, not clear, not distinct, but present beneath the humming, syllables that might have been mama, or home, or sleep. I recorded it. I've listened to the playback 17 times, and I've realized something terrible. There aren't 43 skulls on the children's shelf. I've recounted them repeatedly over the past week, during different lighting conditions, at different times of day, sometimes alone, sometimes with witnesses. The count is always 43. But when the humming starts, when C31 is in my hands, I swear I see 44 small skulls arranged on that shelf. One more than should be there. One that appears and disappears. One that hums lullabies and moves when I'm not looking. I'm scheduled to clean the children's section again this Thursday. I don't know if I'll be able to complete it, because yesterday, while cataloging new acquisitions in a completely different section of the ossuary, I heard the humming again, soft, distant, calling from the children's shelf 3 rooms away, and this time I heard footsteps accompanying it, small footsteps, light and quick, the sound of a child running through empty corridors, searching for something or someone. I don't know what C31 wants. I don't know why the humming has started, why the movement occurs, why the count seems to change. But I know this. Every Thursday, when I clean those 43 skulls, one of them is trying to tell me something, and I'm terrified of the day I finally understand. I put it back after that night, and it's been quiet ever since. My name is Ramon Velez, and I have worked as cemetery director at Cementerio de la Recoleta in Buenos Aires, Argentina, for 22 years. The ossuary beneath the main chapel holds over 3,000 remains, each cataloged with meticulous care spanning 2 centuries. Names, dates, family lineages, everything documented, preserved, honored, except for one. The unmarked skull has no placard, no record, no date. I found it 15 years ago, wedged behind the others in the northeast corner of the lower vault. I was conducting a routine structural assessment when I noticed it partially hidden, covered in dust, so thick it looked like felt. I pulled it out carefully. Adult, male, probably, dense bone structure, significant wear on the teeth. Old, certainly, but how old I couldn't determine without testing. And there was nothing. No catalog number etched on the base, no tag, No entry in any ledger I could find. I searched for 3 weeks, went through every burial record dating back to 1822 when the ossuary was established, cross-referenced family plots, examined transfer documents, checked the archives at the municipal office. Nothing. This skull existed in our collection, but according to every official record, it shouldn't. The logical explanation was simple: administrative error. Someone failed to document a transfer, lost a record during the chaos of one of our political upheavals, simply forgot to log it. These things happen, especially with remains dating back a century or more. I should have created a new catalog entry, assigned it a number, documented the find, incorporated it properly into our collection. Instead, I tried to remove it. I don't know why. Even now, I can't fully explain the impulse, but something about that skull felt wrong. Not evil, not malevolent, just wrong. Like it didn't belong. Like its presence was a violation of some order I didn't consciously understand. I placed it in a storage box, sealed it, and took it home. My plan was vague: dispose of it respectfully, bury it in unconsecrated ground somewhere, make it someone else's problem. I left the cemetery at 6 in the evening with the box in my car's trunk. At 3:14 in the morning, I woke to the sound of every door in my apartment slamming. Not sequentially, simultaneously. The bedroom door, the bathroom, the kitchen cabinets, the front entrance, everything with a hinge crashed shut in perfect unison. The sound was enormous, physical, like a clap of thunder contained within my walls. I sat up, heart hammering, listening to the silence that followed. My apartment is small: 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, modest kitchen. I live alone. There's no one to slam doors, no reason for them to move at all. I checked every room. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. Every door now stood slightly ajar, exactly as I'd left them before bed. No wind, no vibration, no logical cause. I knew immediately what it was. I retrieved the box from my car at 3:45 in the morning, drove back to the cemetery, and returned the skull to its exact location in the northeast corner. Wedged it back behind the others, exactly as I'd found it. Locked the vault. Went home. The next night, I slept undisturbed. I've never touched it since. For 15 years, the unmarked skull has remained in that corner. I see it during my monthly inspections. I dust around it when I clean the vault, but I don't move it, don't catalog it, don't acknowledge it exists beyond the bare minimum required to maintain the ossuary. The other staff members don't know about it. The new assistant director who started last year has never noticed it. Visitors certainly haven't. It's tucked away in a section we don't show on public tours. It's just there, unmarked, unrecorded, waiting. I thought that would be the end of it. An unspoken agreement between me and whatever force wanted that skull to remain exactly where it was. I'd respect its position, and it would remain quiet. But 3 months ago, something changed. I was conducting my usual monthly inspection, checking for pest damage and humidity issues, when I noticed the dust pattern had changed. The thick coating that had covered the skull for 15 years was disturbed, not removed entirely, but marked, as if fingers had traced through it. Patterns, symbols, maybe, though I couldn't identify them, just curved lines and angles, deliberate markings in the dust. I photographed them. I still have the images, though I've shown them to no one. The next month, there were more. Different patterns, more complex. The dust around the skull was almost clean now, as if something had been touching it regularly, handling it, moving it slightly, and returning it. But the vault is locked. I'm the only one with a key. The security system shows no unauthorized entry. The camera feed installed 5 years ago after a vandalism incident records continuous footage. I reviewed 3 months of recordings. Nothing. Just empty vault, unchanging shelves, still silence, except for one frame. A single frame lasting 1/30th of a second in the footage from 2 months ago. At 3:14 in the morning, the same time, the doors slammed in my apartment, the camera captured something. A figure, tall, indistinct, standing in front of the northeast corner where the unmarked skull sits. The image quality is poor, the lighting minimal, but the shape is unmistakable. Human or human-shaped. One frame. The frames before and after show an empty vault. I enhance the image as much as our equipment allows. The figure wears what might be burial clothes from the 1800s. Long coat, formal wear, hands visible at its sides. But the face is obscured by the camera angle and poor lighting. Just a silhouette, standing exactly where I'd stood when I first found the skull 15 years ago. I should report this, file an incident report, increase security, install better cameras, but I know what will happen. Questions, investigations. Someone will want to examine the unmarked skull, catalog it properly, remove it for testing, and I can't let that happen. Because last week, I found something new in the vault. A piece of paper, old and yellowed, placed carefully on the shelf directly in front of the unmarked skull. The paper wasn't there during my previous inspection. It appeared overnight, between my Tuesday closing check and Wednesday morning opening. The paper contained a single sentence, handwritten in ink so faded it was barely legible. The handwriting matched our oldest burial records, early 1800s script. I left the note where I found it. I went to the restricted municipal archives, found a brief reference among execution orders from 1827. A political prisoner, name redacted, buried without record. The entry, consigned to the ossuary, unmarked, unnamed, forgotten by decree. The crime, treason. The sentence, death and erasure. And for nearly 200 years, it worked, until I found the skull and tried to remove it. The doors slammed, because this isn't a haunting seeking remembrance. The unmarked skull doesn't want to be found. Whatever crime merited erasure, they accept the punishment. They want the forgetting to continue, and I'm going to honor that. The skull remains in the northeast corner. No placard, no record. When I retire, I won't mention it to my replacement. I'll let the next director find it on their own, and maybe they'll leave it exactly where it is. Some things are forgotten for a reason. Some dead want to stay that way. I requested a transfer after I saw the footage, but they denied it. My name is Hana Yoshida, and I have worked as maintenance worker at the Zentsuji Temple Ossuary in Kagawa, Japan for 8 years. My responsibilities include structural upkeep, environmental monitoring, and ensuring the preservation conditions remain optimal for the remains. The ossuary holds over 500 skulls, arranged in traditional Buddhist fashion according to death dates and family lineages. One skull, positioned in the back corner of the main chamber, has unusually deep eye sockets. I noticed it during my first month. The orbital cavities are pronounced, creating shadows that seem to follow movement even in static light. Most skulls have shallow sockets. their emptiness obvious and unthreatening. This one is different. The depth creates an illusion of presence, as if something occupies the space where eyes once were. The skull is catalogued as Tanaka Hiroshi, died 1938, age 47. No special notations in the record. No indication of unusual circumstances surrounding his death. Just another name among hundreds, another set of bones receiving care and respect. But I've always felt watched when I work near it. The sensation is specific. Not the general awareness of being in a room with human remains that's constant, unavoidable in this work, and I've grown accustomed to it. This is targeted, focused, like standing in front of a security camera knowing the lens is pointed directly at you. I mentioned it once to the head priest, Reverend Matsuda. He smiled gently. "The dead watch over us," he said. "It's natural to feel their presence. They're not gone, just transformed." But this didn't feel like peaceful observation. It felt like scrutiny. I started avoiding that corner. When I needed to clean it, I worked quickly, kept my back to the wall, positioned myself so I could see the skull in my peripheral vision, never looked directly at it. That became a rule I followed without consciously choosing to. Last winter, we installed security cameras. Structural damage from a minor earthquake required monitoring for settling and potential fractures. 4 cameras, positioned to cover the entire ossuary interior. High definition, night vision capable, motion activated recording. I was responsible for reviewing the footage weekly, checking for any environmental changes that might indicate problems. For the first 2 months, the recordings showed nothing unusual. Empty chamber, still shelves, unchanging arrangements of bone, exactly what you'd expect from a space where nothing living enters. Then I reviewed the footage from January 14th. The timestamp showed 2:33 in the morning. The ossuary was dark except for emergency lighting, creating the kind of deep shadows that cameras struggle to penetrate. The recording was grainy but clear enough. I was visible in the frame, or rather, my shadow was. I'd worked in the ossuary that afternoon, conducting routine humidity checks and dusting the shelves, normal maintenance. I'd left at 5:45 in the evening, locked the doors, set the alarm. No one enters the ossuary after closing. It's sacred space, restricted even to temple staff outside designated hours. But the footage showed my shadow at 2:33 in the morning, not moving, just standing in front of the back corner, in front of Tanaka Hiroshi's skull. The shadow was perfectly still, human-shaped, positioned as if I were standing there studying the remains. But I was home, asleep, 10 kilometers away. I watched the footage 7 times. The shadow appeared at 2:32, remained motionless for 4 minutes, then faded at 2:36, not moving away, fading, gradually becoming transparent until it disappeared entirely. I checked the other camera angles. Only one captured the back corner where Tanaka Hiroshi's skull sits. None of the others showed any movement, any disturbance, any source for the shadow. I documented it, created a report, filed it with the temple administration. Reverend Matsuda reviewed the footage in my presence. He watched in silence, his expression neutral. When it ended, he closed the laptop and looked at me carefully. "How long have you felt watched in that corner?" "Since I started working here," he nodded slowly. "Tanaka Hiroshi was a photographer. Did you know that?" I didn't. The catalog contained only basic information: name, death, date, age. Nothing about profession or life history. He specialized in shadows, Reverend Matsuda continued. Light and darkness, the spaces between presence and absence. His work was exhibited internationally before the war. He believed shadows contained essential truths that visible forms concealed. Why does that matter? Because he died while working, alone in his dark room. They found him 3 days later, positioned in front of his camera as if waiting for the timer. The camera was empty, no film, no plates, just Tanaka and his shadow, frozen in the flashbulb light. I felt cold despite the heated office. He was watching himself, Reverend Matsuda said quietly, trying to capture his own shadow. He believed if he could photograph it at the moment of death, he'd prove consciousness persists beyond physical form. Did he succeed? No one knows. The camera was empty. I brought the laptop to me. Continue your work. Avoid that corner if it troubles you. I requested a transfer the next day. Denied insufficient grounds, staff shortages, so I continue my maintenance work. I check the humidity, dust the shelves, review the security footage, and every week the shadow appears, always at 2:33 in the morning, always in front of the back corner, always motionless, watching. 3 months ago, the shadow changed position. The angle shifted as if the person casting it had turned. Last month, it appeared closer, larger in frame. This week, the shadow is clearer, more defined. I can see details, shoulders, head outline, hands holding something camera-shaped. I've stopped working alone. I schedule maintenance during morning hours when other staff are present. But tonight, the head priest asked me to conduct an emergency check. Water damage, possible leaking near the foundation. I need to inspect the back wall behind Tanaka Hiroshi's skull. It's 11:47 now. In 15 minutes, I'll unlock the doors. The security camera will record everything, just like always. At 2:33 in the morning, the footage will show my shadow standing in the back corner in front of Tanaka Hiroshi's skull. But this time, I'll actually be there. And I don't know what happens when the real person and the impossible shadow occupy the same space at the same time. Maybe nothing. Maybe it's just coincidence, malfunction, explainable phenomenon that I'm too frightened to rationalize. And maybe Tanaka Hiroshi has been waiting, still trying to prove consciousness persists. Maybe those deep sockets aren't empty. I'm gathering my tools now. In 10 minutes, I'll walk to the back corner. Tomorrow, someone will review the footage and see my shadow at 2:33. Except they'll also see me arrive at midnight. They'll see two shadows standing together in front of those watchful sockets, both perfectly still, both waiting. I should call Reverend Matsuda, tell him I can't do this, request emergency assistance, but I won't. Because after 8 years of feeling watched, after months of seeing my shadow appear where I'm not, I need to know. I need to look directly at Tanaka Hiroshi's skull and ask the question I've been avoiding. What are you watching for? And maybe, at 2:33 in the morning, I'll finally get an answer. I return it to its shelf, log the incident, and find it 3 rows over the next week. My name is Anton Kovac, and I have worked as cataloger at the Sedlec Ossuary in Kutna Hora, Czech Republic, for 13 years. The ossuary contains the skeletal remains of approximately 40,000 people, many arranged in decorative displays, chandeliers, coat of arms, pyramids of bone. My responsibility is maintaining the catalog system, ensuring every documented skull and bone fragment remains in its designated position. One skull, labeled Unknown 1889, refuses to stay where it belongs. The first time I noticed it out of position was 4 years ago during quarterly verification. Row 7, position 23, showed an empty space. The skull catalog number U1889047 was in row 12, position 41. I returned it, documented the discrepancy. 3 weeks later, I found it in row 4, position 16. Over the following year, U1889047 appeared in 17 different locations. I developed a routine: locate the skull, verify its catalog number against the distinctive crack pattern along the right parietal bone, return it to its proper position, document everything. The movement pattern was irregular. Sometimes weeks passed between displacements, sometimes only days. Once, I found it had moved overnight. I'd verified its position during closing inspection and discovered it 3 rows away the next morning. I reported it to Dr. Novotny, the chief curator. He suggested structural vibration, tourist interference, thermal expansion causing skeletal shifting, all reasonable explanations that didn't account for the specificity of the movement. Only U1889047 displaced. Only this one skull, repeatedly, consistently. I installed motion sensor cameras focused on row 7. If something or someone was moving the skull, I wanted documentation. The footage showed nothing. U1889047 would be in position at closing. By morning, it would be gone, and the recording showed only still, empty space, no movement, no hands reaching for the shelf. Just one frame showing the skull present, the next frame showing empty space. Dr. Novotny reviewed my documentation after the 7th displacement. There are 40,000 remains here, he said carefully. We can't monitor every bone. Perhaps U1889047 should be relocated to secure storage. But secure storage felt wrong, like admitting defeat, like allowing something unexplainable to dictate our procedures. I continued tracking it, developed a predictive model based on displacement patterns, trying to identify any rhythm or logic. Found none. The skull moved randomly, or appeared to move randomly. Then, last month, it appeared outside the ossuary. I arrived for my morning shift at 7:45. The ossuary doesn't open until 9, so I was alone, unlocking the entrance doors. U1889047 sat on the front step, unmistakable the crack pattern, the catalog number faintly marked on the base, the distinctive yellowing along the temporal bone. Outside, in open air, no footprints in the morning frost, no disturbance to the locks or security system. I photographed it extensively before touching it, documented the temperature, the position, the exact time. That night, I stayed late, hid in the maintenance closet with a clear view of row 7. If U1889047 was going to move, I wanted to witness it directly. I waited until midnight. The ossuary was dark except for emergency lighting, creating deep shadows among the bone displays. Silent except for settling sounds, the building breathing, old wood adjusting to temperature changes. At 12:47, I heard it. Footsteps, not loud, not heavy, just the soft sound of bare feet on stone floor, coming from the direction of row 7. I remained in the closet, watching through the partially open door. The footsteps continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then stopped. Silence returned. I waited 5 minutes before emerging. Checked row 7 immediately. U188947 was gone. I searched the entire ossuary. Found it in the storage room, a section not open to tourists, accessible only with staff keys. The skull sat on a shelf among cleaning supplies, positioned carefully, deliberately placed. The storage room door had been locked. I'd checked it personally during my closing rounds. Only 3 people have keys: myself, Dr. Novotny, and the maintenance supervisor. None of them had entered the building. I returned U188947 to its position. The next morning, I found a note in my office mailbox. Handwritten, old paper, ink that looked decades old. Stop moving me. I know where I need to be. The handwriting matched samples in our archives from the 1880s. Formal script, European education, careful letter forms. I had it analyzed. The paper was consistent with late 19th century production, the ink authentic period material. But the note was fresh. No aging, no deterioration, as if it had been written yesterday using 140-year-old supplies. I brought it to Dr. Novotny. He read it twice before speaking. Do you know why that skull is catalogued as unknown? No record of identity. Many from that period lack documentation. Not quite. There is a record, partial. The remains belonged to a cemetery worker who died in 1889 during renovation work. He was organizing remains for transfer to the ossuary when the building collapsed, killed instantly. They never recovered all of him. Some bones remained buried in the rubble. Why wasn't he properly cataloged? He was, initially, but his family requested his remains be removed, given proper burial elsewhere. The church agreed, but when they tried to locate his bones among the thousands transferred, they couldn't identify which were his. They gave up eventually. So U1889047 might be him, might not be. No way to confirm. He's been part of the collection for over a century, unnamed, unidentified, lost among the thousands he spent his life organizing. Dr. Novotny returned the note to me. Maybe he's still working, still organizing, still trying to find his proper place. I stopped returning U1889047 to row 7 after that. When I find it displaced, I log the new location and leave it there. Last week, I found it positioned in the letter M of Morta, filling a gap I'd never noticed. 2 days later, it was in the crypt among family groupings from the 1500s. Yesterday, back in row 7, position 23, its original location. I haven't moved it, haven't logged a displacement. I'm waiting to see if it stays. U1889047 isn't being moved. It's moving itself, searching for the bones it belonged with in life, trying to find its proper context among the thousands it helped preserve. Maybe eventually it will find the right position and stop moving, or maybe it's still organizing, still cataloging, still doing the job it died trying to complete. And if that's true, then every time U1889047 moves, it's telling me something, showing me connections I've missed, relationships I haven't documented, proper arrangements I've failed to recognize. Maybe the skull isn't lost, maybe I am. This morning, I found U188947 inches, a new location. Not random this time, deliberate, positioned next to another unknown skull from 1890 catalog number U1890023. Two unknowns, side by side, as if they belonged together. I checked the historical records, found something I'd missed before. Two workers died in the 1889 collapse, not one. The second body was recovered weeks later, too deteriorated for identification. Both were cataloged as unknown and incorporated into the collection. U1889047 and U1890023 might be colleagues, friends, brothers, possibly. Both killed doing the same work, both lost to history, both scattered among the thousands they died organizing. I left them together, and tomorrow, when I check that position, I'll know if U1889047 finally found where it belongs, or if it's still searching, still organizing, still trying to complete the work it started 136 years ago. The priest blessed it twice, and the cold got worse. My name is Beatriz Santos, and I have worked as cleaner at the Catacumbas de los Capuchinos in Palermo, Italy, for 9 years. I maintain the underground chambers where over 8,000 bodies rest in various states of preservation, some mummified, some skeletal, some still clothed in burial garments from centuries past. The work requires respect, careful attention, and acceptance of the strange atmosphere that permeates spaces where the dead outnumber the living. I clean the niches every Tuesday. The alcoves are carved directly into limestone walls, each containing multiple skulls arranged according to religious orders and family lineages. Most are straightforward dust accumulation, limestone residue, occasional moisture issues, routine maintenance in an ancient space. The third niche, from the left in the western corridor, is different. It's always colder. Not slightly cooler, not marginally different from adjacent spaces, genuinely cold. The kind of cold that makes breath visible even in summer. The kind that penetrates clothing and settles into bones. I noticed it during my first month, attributed it to airflow patterns, underground temperature variations, geological quirks of the catacomb structure. I mentioned it to the facilities manager, who checked the ventilation system. Everything normal. No drafts, no structural issues, no explanation for localized temperature drop. The cold persisted. I started bringing a jacket specifically for cleaning that niche, even during August, when above-ground temperatures exceeded 35 degrees. Then I heard the whispers. Not words, just breath. Soft exhalation, like someone standing very close, speaking too quietly to distinguish language. I'd be dusting the skulls, working systematically through the alcove, and I'd hear it, constant, rhythmic, intimate. The first time, I turned around immediately, expecting to find a colleague or lost tourist. No one. The corridor was empty, the other niches silent. Just me and the whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I reported it to Father Giuseppe, who oversees the catacombs. He's 74, has worked here for 49 years, witnessed things he refuses to discuss in detail. I explained the cold, the sounds, my growing discomfort with that specific niche. He blessed it the following Wednesday. Holy water, prayers of protection, formal consecration. I watched from the corridor entrance as he performed the ritual, his voice echoing through the limestone chambers. The next Tuesday, the cold was worse. Noticeably, measurably worse. I wore thermal layers and still felt it penetrate through to skin, and the whispers had changed. Still wordless, still breath, but more urgent, more present. Father Giuseppe returned 2 weeks later, brought 3 other priests, performed a longer blessing ceremony, prayers in Latin, incense, holy relics placed temporarily in the niche. The ritual lasted 40 minutes. For 3 days afterward, the niche felt normal, regular catacomb temperature, no unusual sounds. I thought the blessing had worked, that whatever presence occupied that space had been properly addressed. Then Tuesday came again. The cold returned stronger than before. The whispers were no longer soft, they were insistent. Multiple voices now, overlapping, creating a sound like wind through narrow spaces. But no wind moved. The air was completely still. I've continued cleaning the niche. It's my job, my responsibility, but I work quickly now. I don't linger. I dust the skulls with mechanical efficiency, avoid making eye contact with the empty sockets, focus on completing the task, and moving to the next alcove. Last month, something new appeared. Condensation on the skulls themselves. Not everywhere, just in that niche. Moisture forming on bone surfaces despite the dry underground environment. I documented it, photographed it, showed the evidence to Father Giuseppe. He examined the images carefully. "That's not condensation," he said quietly. "What is it?" "Look at the pattern. It's not random. It follows the contours of the bone, but it concentrates in specific areas." I looked closer. He was right. The moisture accumulated around the orbital sockets and nasal cavities, around the openings where breath would have emerged in life. "It's like they're breathing," I said. Father Giuseppe didn't disagree. "I've researched the niche's history. The skulls belong to Franciscan monks who died during a plague outbreak in 1624. 47 men, all dead within 3 weeks. They were buried hastily in a mass grave, later exhumed and arranged in the catacombs during renovation work in the 1700s. No individual names, no personal records, just a collective designation. 47 men who died struggling for breath, drowning in their own fluids, suffocating as the disease consumed their lungs. And now, 400 years later, I hear them breathing in that cold, narrow niche. The whispers aren't words because they never had chance to speak final words. They died too quickly, too overwhelmed by physical suffering to articulate prayers or farewells. But the breathing continues. The exhalation persists. Some echo of those final desperate gasps, repeating endlessly in limestone darkness. I've asked Father Giuseppe if we can relocate the remains, give them individual burial, separate them, provide the dignity they were denied during plague panic. He refuses. They've been together for 4 centuries. Separating them now might make it worse. Worse how? They died together. Perhaps they need to stay together. Perhaps the whispering isn't distress, perhaps it's comfort. 47 men who couldn't breathe alone, still breathing together. I don't find that comforting. Yesterday, I noticed the moisture pattern had changed. Still concentrated around the breathing passages, but now forming small pools. Actual liquid accumulating in the eye sockets, creating the appearance of tears. I collected a sample, sent it to a laboratory for analysis. The results came back this morning. Saline solution, salt water, the chemical composition of human tears. 47 plague victims, dead for 400 years, producing fresh tears in a cold catacomb niche. I'm cleaning that section again tomorrow, Tuesday. My regular schedule: I'll bring my thermal jacket, my cleaning supplies, my documentation equipment. I'll dust each skull carefully, respectfully. I'll wipe away the condensation that isn't condensation, the tears that shouldn't exist. And I'll listen to the whispers, the breathing, the sound of 47 men who died together, still exhaling in unison, still present in the space where their bones were finally given rest. Father Giuseppe says I should pray for them. Ask God to grant them peace, release them from whatever binds them to this cold niche. But I wonder if they want release. They died in isolation, in plague houses and quarantine wards, separated from community and comfort. Now they're together, 47 anonymous monks, breathing as one, sharing the cold and the darkness. Maybe that's all they wanted. Not heaven, not eternal rest, not individual peace, just companionship, just the assurance that they're not suffering alone anymore. The whispers might not be distress, they might be conversation. 47 voices speaking to each other in the only language left to them: breath, exhalation, the fundamental sound of being alive. Even when life has long since ended, I clean the niche every Tuesday. I listen to them breathe. And sometimes, in the coldest moments, when the whispers are loudest and the moisture forms fastest, I whisper back, not words, just breath, acknowledgement that I hear them, that someone remembers that 47 nameless plague victims aren't forgotten in their cold limestone alcove. I don't know if they hear me. But the next Tuesday, the cold is always slightly less intense, the whispers always slightly softer, as if they're grateful someone finally answered, someone finally breathed back. I stopped testing after the second identical result, but the stain keeps growing. My name is Dr. Priya Patel, and I have worked as conservator at the Canterbury Cathedral Crypt in Kent, England, for 12 years. My role involves preserving and analyzing the skeletal remains housed in the medieval undercroft, ensuring proper environmental conditions, and documenting any changes or deterioration. The collection spans 9 centuries, containing remains of monks, nobles, plague victims, and common people whose bones were relocated here during various cathedral renovations. One skull, catalogued as CCR1823M, has a rust-colored stain across the left temporal bone. The stain is distinctive, roughly circular, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter, darker at the center and fading toward the edges. When I first examined it during my initial inventory 11 years ago, I documented it as probable iron oxide residue from burial soil, common enough in remains from certain geological areas. But the color bothered me. Too red, too organic looking. Not the dull brown of iron staining, but something brighter, fresher. I tested it 8 months ago using approved non-destructive analysis protocols. Spectroscopy first, then chemical composition assessment. The results were unexpected. Hemoglobin markers consistent with human blood. Old blood certainly, but blood nonetheless. I revised my documentation. Perhaps the deceased had died from head trauma, and residual blood from the wound had stained the bone during initial decomposition. Unusual for it to persist this long, but not impossible. Then I noticed the stain had grown. I maintain detailed photographic records of every specimen in the collection, taken under controlled lighting conditions at regular intervals. Comparing images from 11 years ago to current documentation showed clear expansion. The stain was now 4 centimeters in diameter, a full centimeter larger That's when I tested it again. Same protocols, same methodology, more careful sampling to ensure accuracy. The results came back identical to the first test. Human blood, fresh markers, less than 6 months old. The skull is from 1823, 200 years old. I've reviewed the results 17 times, consulted with colleagues in forensic anthropology, sent samples to independent laboratories, questioned my own methodology and equipment calibration. Everything confirms the same impossible conclusion. The stain contains fresh human blood that renews itself continuously on a 200-year-old skull. I haven't reported this to cathedral authorities. How would I explain it? What action could they take? Blessing a skull won't change biochemical analysis results. Instead, I've been monitoring it, photographing it weekly, measuring its expansion, documenting the rate of growth, 3 millimeters per season, precisely, consistently. By this rate, the stain will cover the entire left side of the skull in approximately 4 years. The skull itself shows no other anomalies. The bone is stable, properly preserved, exhibiting normal degradation patterns for its age. No structural issues, no active decomposition, no explanation for the presence of fresh biological material. I've researched CCR 1823M's history. Limited records exist. Most documentation from that period was lost in a fire in 1942. What remains indicates the skull belonged to a cathedral mason named Thomas Wright, aged 31, who died in 1823 from a fall during renovation work. The fall fractured his skull, left temporal bone, exactly where the stain is located. According to the brief accident report I found in diocesan archives, Wright fell from scaffolding while working on the cathedral's western tower. He survived the initial impact, remained conscious for approximately 3 hours before dying. Witnesses reported he kept touching the wound, his hand coming away covered in blood, asking repeatedly if someone had stopped the bleeding. No one had stopped it. He bled until he died, and apparently 200 years later, he's still bleeding. I've tried to rationalize this. Mineral deposits leaching through the bone, environmental contamination, laboratory error, contamination from my own handling despite gloves and sterile protocols. None of these explanations account for the consistent growth rate, the fresh hemoglobin markers, the precise location matching his fatal wound. Last month, I photographed the skull under UV light, looking for fluorescence patterns that might indicate chemical processes I'd missed. The stain glowed, bright red, luminescent, as if the blood beneath it was still oxygenated, still flowing, living blood on dead bone. I sealed those photographs in a restricted file, showed them to no one. Yesterday, I noticed something new. The stain has developed a texture. Previously, it was flat, absorbed into the bone's surface. Now it's slightly raised, tacky to gloved touch, wet. I collected another sample, sent it for rush analysis to a private laboratory that doesn't know the specimen's age or origin. The results should arrive tomorrow. But I already know what they'll show. Fresh human blood, type O positive, same as every previous test. The same blood that's been appearing on this skull for at least 11 years, possibly longer. I've started checking the other skulls in the collection, examining them for similar stains, similar anomalies. Found nothing, just CCR 1823M. Just Thomas Wright, still bleeding from the wound that killed him in 1823. I dream about it now. In the dreams, I'm in the cathedral undercroft, alone, late at night. The skull sits on the examination table, and the stain is moving, spreading. Blood runs down the temporal bone, pools on the table's surface, drips onto the floor. In the dreams, the blood doesn't stop. It flows continuously, endlessly, as if the skull contains an infinite supply. The undercroft floods with it, red liquid rising, covering the floor, reaching my ankles, my knees, my waist. And through it all, I hear a voice, faint, desperate, the same question asked over and over. Has someone stopped the bleeding? Has someone stopped it? I wake before I can answer. This morning, when I checked CCR 1823M, the stain had grown another 2 millimeters, ahead of schedule, accelerating, and at the stain's center, where the blood appears freshest, wettest, most active, there's a new detail I've never noticed before. It's moving, pulsing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I measured it. 72 beats per minute. Normal human resting heart rate, coming from a skull that's been dead for 200 years. I should report this. Contact cathedral authorities, medical examiners, someone with authority to investigate. This has moved beyond conservation work into something I'm not qualified to handle. But reporting it means losing access, means they'll seal the skull away, run invasive tests, potentially destroy it looking for answers. And somehow that feels wrong. Thomas Wright fell from scaffolding, bled for 3 hours, died asking if someone had stopped the bleeding. Maybe he's still asking, still waiting for an answer that never came. Maybe the blood keeps flowing because the question remains unanswered. I've made a decision. Tomorrow, during my regular conservation hours, I'm going to speak to the skull out loud, acknowledge Thomas Wright by name, tell him yes, the bleeding stopped, tell him he can rest. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't accept supernatural explanations for physical phenomena. But I believe in unfinished business, in trauma that persists beyond death, in questions that echo through centuries, waiting for someone to finally provide the answer. So tomorrow, I'll answer. I'll tell Thomas Wright what he needed to hear 200 years ago, and maybe the blood will finally stop flowing, the stain will finally stop growing, and a man who died terrified and confused will finally understand that his suffering has ended. Or maybe the blood will keep pulsing, keep spreading, keep renewing itself every 6 months with fresh hemoglobin markers that shouldn't exist. Maybe some wounds don't heal. Maybe some bleeding never stops. Maybe death isn't always an ending. I'll find out tomorrow. For now, CCR 1823M sits in its climate-controlled storage, the stain bright against yellowed bone, pulsing 72 times per minute, still bleeding, still asking, still waiting for someone to tell him it's over, that he can finally let go. My supervisor said to let them stay together, that it's kinder that way. My name is Tomas Bianchi, and I have worked as assistant keeper at the Fontanelle Cemetery Ossuary in Naples, Italy for 7 years. The caverns hold approximately 40,000 skulls arranged in systematic rows, many adopted by local families who maintain them, leave offerings, pray for intercession. My job involves cataloging these informal adoptions, ensuring the skulls remain properly positioned, maintaining the delicate balance between sacred space and tourist attraction. 2 skulls, side by side on the eastern wall, are cataloged as Married Couple, 1901. They sit in adjacent niches, positioned to face outward toward visitors. except every morning they face each other. I first noticed it 3 years ago during routine inspection. The skulls were turned inward, orbital sockets aligned, positioned as if in conversation. I assumed someone had moved them, a visitor, perhaps, or one of the local adopters rearranging their chosen skull. I rotated them back to face forward, standard positioning. The next morning, they faced each other again. This continued for 2 weeks before I mentioned it to Senior Keeper DeLuca. He examined the skulls carefully. Don't separate them. Stop fighting the turning. But the display protocol doesn't account for love. These two died together in a fire, found in bed, holding hands, overcome by smoke, married 56 years. I looked at the skulls, now facing each other across the narrow space between niches. Why do they turn? Because being forced to stare at strangers all day is cruel when the person you love is right beside you. From that day, I stopped rotating them. By evening, if visitors have moved them, they're facing forward. By morning, they've turned back, always overnight, always in darkness. I've tested this. The movement is subtle but consistent, deliberate. I installed a small camera 6 months ago, hidden among the flowers and candles left by adopters. I wanted to see how it happened, wanted to witness the impossible. The footage shows nothing. The skulls facing forward at 6 p.m. when I lock the gates, then darkness for 12 hours. At 6 a.m. when I unlock, they're facing each other, no movement visible, no frames showing transition, just before and after, as if the change happens between moments. I've reviewed the footage countless times, enhanced it, slowed it down, examined every pixel. The skulls don't move gradually, they simply are forward facing, then are rotated with no visible transition. Last month, something new happened. I arrived for my morning shift to find a fresh rose placed between the two skulls, bright red, recently cut, still fragrant, the kind lovers bring to graves. No one had entered the ossuary overnight. The security logs showed no breaches. The gates remained locked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., but the rose was there, positioned perfectly between the paired skulls. I checked the camera footage. At 3:14 a.m., a single frame shows something. Not clear, not definitive, but present. A shadow between the skulls, human-shaped. Two human shapes, actually close together, overlapping. Then the next frame shows nothing, just the skulls facing each other and the rose that wasn't there before. I've stopped questioning it. The rose appears every few weeks now, always red, always fresh, always positioned between them. I remove the wilted ones when they fade, replace them with the new arrivals. It's become part of my routine. Check the paired skulls, remove old rows, acknowledge new one, continue inspection. The local adopters have noticed. An elderly woman who maintains a different skull asked me about it last week. The married ones, she said, pointing to the paired skulls. They get fresh roses, but I never see you bring them. Who's leaving them? I don't know. She smiled. Love that's strong doesn't end with death. My husband's been gone 12 years, but I still feel him sometimes, still hear his voice, still wake up expecting him beside me. These two, she gestured to the skulls, they have each other still. That's a blessing. I've started paying attention to the other skulls in the ossuary, wondering how many others have stories like this. How many were separated from people they loved, forced into eternal proximity with strangers? But most skulls stay as I position them. Most don't move, don't turn, don't receive mysterious roses in the night. Only the paired set, only the married couple from 1901 who died holding hands and apparently refused to stop. Yesterday, I found something new. Not a rose this time, a photograph, old and faded, tucked between the niches. The woman wears a white dress, the man a dark suit. They're posed formally, as was common then, but their hands are clasped between them, the same way they died, on the back in faded ink. Antonio e Maria, Sposati 1845. Married 1845, not 1901. That means they were married 56 years when they died. Exactly what DeLuca's grandmother had said. I have their names now. Antonio and Maria. No surnames, but names are enough. Identity, confirmation. They were real people, not just catalogued remains. I spoke to them that evening before closing, out loud, aware I probably seemed foolish, but needing to acknowledge what I'd learned. Antonio, Maria, I know who you are now. The skulls faced each other, as always, silent, still. I won't separate you. I won't force you to face strangers. You can turn every night if you want. You can keep receiving roses from wherever they come from. I understand. That night, the footage showed something different. The shadow at 3:14 a.m. was clearer. Two distinct human forms, standing close, positioned exactly where the skulls sit. And for one frame, just one, they appeared to be embracing. The next morning, two roses waited, one at each skull, red and fresh and impossible. I've told no one about this. Not DeLuca, not the other keepers, not the adopters who visit regularly. This feels private, sacred, a secret between me and two people who died holding hands over a century ago. Every morning, I check on them, Antonio and Maria, facing each other across the narrow space between niches. Sometimes there are new roses, sometimes just the skulls, turned inward, maintaining their eternal conversation. I clean around them carefully. Dust the niches, remove wilted flowers, straighten the photograph I've now positioned permanently between them. I do my job with respect for what they represent. Because DeLuca was right. Love that strong doesn't need flesh to continue, doesn't need eyes to see each other or hands to touch. It just needs permission to persist, and I'm giving them that permission. Every night, when I lock the gates and leave Antonio and Maria in darkness, I know they'll turn to face each other, and know they'll maintain their vigil. Know that somewhere in the mystery between life and death, they're still together, still married, still refusing to let go. And in the morning, I'll find them exactly as they want to be, facing each other forever. The dust showed barefoot tracks, leading to the wall, then stopping. My name is Elias Mercier, and I have worked as groundskeeper at the Abbaye de Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris, France, for 16 years. My responsibilities include maintaining the cemetery grounds, the chapel, and the underground crypt system that extends beneath the abbey. The deepest section, the basement crypt, holds the oldest remains, pre-1600s, mostly skulls and bones from the abbey's earliest years, before proper record keeping, before systematic cataloging. I avoid the basement crypt when possible, not from fear, but from simple discomfort. The space is narrow, low ceilinged, poorly lit. The air feels heavier down there, thicker, as if centuries of silence have accumulated into something almost solid. But 3 months ago, a water leak required emergency repair, moisture seeping through the foundation, potentially damaging the oldest remains. I had to inspect the basement level, identify the source, coordinate with the contractors. I descended the worn stone steps at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, brought my flashlight, my clipboard, my moisture meter, standard equipment for routine maintenance in a space that hasn't been routine for 400 years. The basement crypt is essentially a tunnel 8 feet wide, perhaps 6 feet high in places, extending back into darkness for about 40 meters. Skulls are stacked along both walls, arranged in rough pyramids, some secured with iron bands installed centuries ago. No individual identification, just bone. Hundreds of skulls, thousands probably, their names lost to time and fire and revolution. I found the leak source quickly. Cracked foundation stone, water trickling through from the street level drainage system above. Not severe, but requiring immediate attention. I photographed it, took measurements, made my notes. That's when I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from deeper in the crypt, from the section that extends beyond where I stood. I stopped moving, held my breath, listened carefully. The footsteps continued, slow, measured pace, the sound of bare feet on stone, not shoes, not boots, skin against rock, wet sounding, as if the feet were damp or the floor was slick with moisture. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence for perhaps 10 seconds. Then they resumed, closer now, coming toward me. I should have left immediately, should have climbed those stairs and contacted security. But I'm groundskeeper. This is my space, my responsibility. I needed to know who was down there. I moved forward, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The crypt narrowed as it extended back, the ceiling dropping lower, the stacked skulls pressing closer on both sides. The footsteps stopped again. This time, they didn't resume. I reached the end of the crypt, a solid wall, natural bedrock. The tunnel simply stopped. No doorways, no passages, no exits, just wall. And in the dust on the floor, clear as daylight, were tracks, barefoot, adult sized, leading from the wall directly toward where I stood, not to the wall from it, as if someone had emerged from solid rock and walked forward. The tracks showed clear toe definition, arch impression, heel strike, recent. The dust around them undisturbed, except for the prints themselves. I photographed them, measured them, 27 centimeters long. Male, probably. The stride pattern suggested slow walking, deliberate movement. The tracks ended 3 meters from the wall, just stopped. No turn, no fade, no smudging. One final footprint, then nothing, as if whoever made them simply ceased to exist mid-step. I backed away slowly, retreated to the stairs, climbed to ground level, and called Father Bernard, the Abbey's senior priest. He listened to my description without interrupting. The builders. What builders? The men who constructed the original crypt in 1587. The records indicate 4 workers died during construction. Cave-in, structural collapse, something catastrophic. They were buried where they fell, incorporated into the foundation. Building crypts over bodies was common then, practical even. Why move remains when you're creating space for the dead? So there are bodies in the walls? In the walls, under the floor, part of the structure itself, the Abbey's foundation is built on bones, some intentional, some accidental. The builders who died became part of what they were building. I returned to the basement crypt 2 days later with the contractors. The water leak required repair regardless of phantom footsteps. I showed them the photographs, explained what I'd heard. They worked quickly, efficiently, without comment. Fixed the crack, sealed the foundation, completed the job in 4 hours. Not one of them mentioned the footsteps or the tracks, but I noticed they stayed close together, didn't wander into the deeper sections, didn't ask questions about the stacked skulls or the age of the remains. After they left, I examined the dust again. The barefoot tracks were still there, unchanged, exactly as I'd photographed them 3 days earlier. Dust doesn't preserve footprints that long. Air movement, vibration, even breathing should disturb the pattern, but these remained perfect, as if frozen. I photographed them again, compared the new images to the originals, identical, the same tracks, the same pressure points, the same abrupt ending. I've been monitoring them weekly since then. The tracks never change, never fade, never extend or retract, just those same barefoot impressions leading from the wall to nowhere. Last week, I heard the footsteps again. Different day Thursday this time, around 10 a.m. I was in the main crypt level, checking humidity gauges, when I heard them below, clear, unmistakable. The sound of someone walking in the basement section. I didn't investigate, just noted the time in my log and continued my work. The next morning, I checked the basement level. The original tracks remained unchanged, but beside them, parallel to them, a new set had appeared. Different size, smaller, perhaps 24 centimeters, another person, another set of bare feet emerging from the wall, walking forward, stopping at the same distance. Two builders now, two sets of footprints, both leading from solid rock, both ending in empty space. I documented everything, photographed, measured, logged, reported it to Father Bernard, who simply added it to the Abbey's archive of unexplained phenomena. There's an entire section, apparently, centuries of strange occurrences, all documented, none explained. Should we do something? I asked. Like what? Exorcism? Blessing? These men died building a sacred space. They're not malevolent. They're just still working. Working on what? Whatever they died trying to complete. I've continued my normal duties, maintain the grounds, check the crypts, monitor for moisture and structural issues, but I've started listening more carefully in the basement section. The footsteps occur irregularly. Sometimes weeks pass with silence. Sometimes I hear them multiple times in a single week. Always the same pattern, heavy, deliberate, barefoot on stone. Always coming from the deepest section. From the wall where the tracks originate. 3 days ago, I found a third set of prints. Then yesterday, a fourth. 4 builders died in the collapse. 4 sets of tracks now lead from the wall. They're all present now, all accounted for, all walking their endless circuit from bedrock to nowhere, still trying to complete work that killed them 438 years ago. I don't know what happens when all 4 are walking simultaneously. I don't know if they'll continue this pattern forever or if they're building towards something. But tonight, I'm staying late, bringing a camera, proper lighting, recording equipment. When I hear the footsteps next, I want to see if there's anything visible, anything beyond the sound and the tracks. Father Bernard advised against it. Some mysteries are better left unwitnessed, but I'm groundskeeper. This is my crypt. These are my dead. If four builders are walking in the basement, still trying to finish what they started, I need to know. I need to see them, or at least understand why they're still here, still working, still leaving tracks that lead from solid walls to empty air. The abbey closes in 2 hours. Then I'll descend those worn stairs one more time, and when the footsteps begin, I'll be ready. Camera running, lights positioned, waiting to witness what 400 years of death hasn't stopped. Four builders, still walking, still building, still trying to complete the crypt that became their grave. His last words were, "I'll watch them all," and sometimes I feel exactly that. My name is Isabel Ramirez, and I have worked as historian at the Museo de las Momias in Guanajuato, Mexico for 10 years. My research focuses on the naturally mummified remains in our collection, documenting their histories, preserving their stories. Most died from cholera, mining accidents, childbirth complications. Natural causes for the era, tragic but understandable. One skull shows clear signs of execution. Catalog number GM1654E. The damage is unmistakable, a massive fracture across the crown, perfectly consistent with a single axe blow. Clean edge, deep penetration, immediate death. The skull belonged to a man named Sebastian Cortez, executed for heresy in 1654. I found his trial transcript in the colonial archives. 371 years old, written in formal Spanish, detailing accusations of blasphemy, prohibited texts, ceremonies conducted in darkness. The trial lasted 6 days. Sebastian refused to recant, refused to name accomplices, refused to express remorse. The transcript records his final statement before sentencing. You fear what you don't understand. You kill what questions your certainty. But death doesn't end observation. I'll watch them all. Every priest, every judge, every man who claims authority over truth. I'll watch until stones crumble and your churches fall to dust. They executed him the next morning. Public beheading in the town square. His body was denied Christian burial, left in unconsecrated ground until the bones were eventually collected and added to the ossuary during expansion work in the 1700s. I documented all of this 6 years ago. Standard historical research. Tragic story, certainly, but centuries past, relevant only for academic understanding of colonial religious persecution. Then I started feeling watched, not generally, specifically, only when I'm in the section where GM1654E is displayed, only when I'm working near Sebastian Cortez' fractured skull. The sensation is precise, focused, like standing in front of someone who's staring directly at you, waiting for you to notice, to acknowledge, to meet their gaze. But he has no eyes, just empty sockets, dark and deep, angled toward the viewing corridor. I mentioned it casually to Dr. Flores, the museum director. She smiled. The dead watch over us. It's natural in this work, but this doesn't feel natural. It feels intentional. I started documenting when the sensation occurs. Time of day, my location in the museum, specific activities I'm performing, looking for patterns, for logical explanation. The feeling intensifies when I'm researching religious history, when I'm reading colonial documents, examining church records, studying the Inquisition's trials and executions, When I'm doing exactly the work Sebastian claimed he'd continue after death, observing, documenting, questioning authority. 3 months ago, I photographed GM1654E for updated catalog documentation. Standard procedure, controlled lighting, multiple angles, detailed close ups of the fracture damage. When I reviewed the images that evening, I noticed something. In one photograph, taken at a specific angle with specific lighting, the shadows inside the orbital sockets create an appearance of depth, as if something occupies that space, as if the emptiness isn't quite empty. I dismissed it as photographic artifact, shadow and light creating illusion. I've taken thousands of photographs in this museum. I know how bone reflects and absorbs light, how angles create false impressions. But the image bothered me. I couldn't articulate why, couldn't identify what specifically disturbed me about those shadows. Just a persistent discomfort that kept me returning to that particular photograph, studying it, trying to understand. Last month, during evening inventory, I was alone in the ossuary section. The museum closes at 6 p.m., but staff have access until 8 p.m. for research and documentation. I was cataloging new acquisitions, working systematically through the shelves. I passed GM1654E at approximately 7:15 p.m. The watching sensation was stronger than usual, intense enough that I stopped walking, turned to face the skull directly. Those empty sockets, that massive fracture, the bone yellowed by centuries, but somehow still conveying violence, still showing the moment of death frozen in calcium structure. I spoke out loud. I know what they did to you. I've read the trial records. I've documented the injustice. Silence. Obviously, skulls don't respond. But the watching sensation intensified, became almost physical, pressure against my chest, my forehead, the feeling of someone stepping closer, leaning in, examining me with the same intensity I'd used to examine the fractured crown. I left quickly, finished my work in a different section, didn't return to that corridor for the rest of the evening. The next morning, I found my research notes disturbed. Not dramatically, just shifted. The papers I'd left stacked neatly on my desk were spread out, and on top, open to a specific page, was Sebastian's trial transcript, the page containing his final statement. I'll watch them all. The transcript had been filed in my locked drawer. I should have reported this. Security breach, potential theft, or vandalism. But nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. Just my documents, rearranged, with that specific page displayed prominently. I've continued my research, still document colonial history, still examine religious persecution, still try to give voice to the people who were silenced by authority. But I've started including Sebastian in my work, not just as a data point, not just as catalog number GM1654E, as a person, a man who questioned, who resisted, who chose death over compromise. I've written about him. Academic papers, museum exhibitions, public lectures. I've made sure people know his name, know what happened, know that the Inquisition's certainty was often just fear disguised as righteousness. And the watching sensation has changed. It's still present, still focused, still undeniable when I'm near that fractured skull, but it feels different now. Not threatening, not invasive, almost satisfied. Last week, I gave a presentation on colonial religious persecution, used Sebastian's case as the primary example. showed the trial records, explained the charges, detailed the execution, argued that his questions were valid, that his doubt was rational, that killing him didn't prove the church right, it just proved they were afraid. The lecture hall held 80 people: students, academics, local historians. I showed photographs of GM 1654E, the fractured crown, the evidence of violence. And I felt him watching. Not just me, everyone. Every person in that room, listening to his story, learning his name, understanding what was done to him. When I returned to the museum that evening, I went directly to the ossuary section, stood in front of G M1654E, those empty sockets, still angled toward the corridor, still dark and deep. I spoke quietly. They heard you today. 80 people heard your story. Your name won't be forgotten. The watching sensation faded. Not completely, I still feel it sometimes when I work near that section, but softer now, patient rather than pressing, as if Sebastian got what he wanted. Not revenge, not vindication, just observation, just the chance to keep watching while someone finally tells the truth about what happened. Yesterday, I found something new in the archives, a letter written by one of the priests who condemned Sebastian, written 3 years after the execution, shortly before the priest's own death. The letter expresses doubt, questions whether they were right to execute a man for asking questions they couldn't answer, wonders if certainty is sometimes just fear, admits that he still sees Sebastian's face, still hears his final words, still feels watched during private moments when doubt creeps in. The priest died guilt-ridden and uncertain, his confidence shattered by the very questions he'd tried to silence. Sebastian's final words were accurate. He did watch. He did outlast them. 371 years later, his fractured skull still occupies space in this museum, still draws attention, still makes people uncomfortable, still forces questions about authority and truth and the cost of certainty. And I'm here, documenting, researching, making sure his observation continues, making sure people know what happens when fear masquerades as righteousness. The watching sensation is present now, as I write this, focused, attentive, as if Sebastian is reading over my shoulder, confirming I'm getting it right, ensuring his story is told accurately. I don't mind anymore. If anything, I appreciate the reminder. Some deaths don't end observation. Some questions persist beyond execution. Some voices echo for centuries, waiting for someone to finally listen and respond. Sebastian Cortes died in 1654, executed for questioning authority. But he's still here, still watching, still asking the same questions that terrified men enough to swing an axe at his skull. And as long as I'm researching, as long as I'm documenting, as long as I'm telling his story, he'll keep watching. I'll make sure of that. I don't look for it anymore. I just log displaced remains and move on. My name is Mateo Reyes, and I have worked as security guard at the Chowchilla Cemetery near Nazca, Peru, for 14 years. The site contains pre-Columbian burial chambers, many opened by grave robbers decades ago and now preserved as archaeological exhibits. My job is simple: patrol the grounds, monitor for vandalism, ensure nothing is disturbed during overnight hours. One skull, displayed in Tomb 7, is missing its lower jaw, mandible, completely absent. Just the cranium, seated upright among grave goods and textile fragments, positioned to show visitors what ancient burials looked like. The skull has been there since the site opened to tourism in 1987. Catalog records describe it as adult male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, mandible lost to degradation or grave robbing. Except the mandible isn't lost, it moves. I found it for the first time 4 years ago during morning patrol, 10 feet from the skull, resting on the sand outside Tomb 7. Bone dry, sun bleached, unmistakably a mandible. I compared it to the skull perfect fit. Same coloration, same age, same burial. I returned it to its proper position, reuniting jaw with cranium. Documented the incident, assumed vandalism or tourist interference. 3 days later, the mandible was missing again. Found it 20 feet away this time, partially buried in sand near Tomb 3. I returned it. Again, the pattern continued. Every few days, every few weeks, I'd find the mandible displaced, sometimes close to Tomb 7, sometimes far across the cemetery grounds. Once, I found it outside the perimeter fence, sitting in open desert as if it had traveled through chain link. I stopped trying to understand how, started focusing on documentation and return. Find mandible, photograph location, bring it back to Tomb 7, log incident, continue patrol. But the distances kept increasing. Last year, I found it half a kilometer away, just the mandible, sitting upright in sand, teeth facing skyward, no footprints around it, no indication of how it got there. Just bone where bone shouldn't be. I returned it. Next week, it was gone again. Dr. Vasquez, the site archaeologist, suggested animals, scavengers moving bone, natural processes redistributing remains. But there's no bite marks, no damage, no evidence of animal interference, just clean bone appearing in impossible locations. I proposed securing it, adhesive, pins, something to keep jaw and skull together permanently. Dr. Vasquez refused. These remains have survived 1,000 years. We're not damaging them for convenience. So I continued finding the mandible and returning it and finding it again. After 2 years of this, I stopped reporting specific locations, just wrote mandible displaced in my log. No coordinates, no photographs, no detailed documentation, just acknowledgement that it happened again. Because the locations were becoming harder to explain, I found it inside a locked storage building on top of a water tank, buried 3 feet deep in sand that showed no signs of digging. Inside my patrol vehicle, resting on the passenger seat when I returned from rounds. That last one, finding it inside my locked vehicle that broke my clinical detachment. I held the mandible, examining it carefully. Same ancient burial remains that shouldn't be mobile, shouldn't be traveling, shouldn't be appearing in places that require opposable thumbs and problem-solving ability to access. I spoke to it, out loud, alone in my vehicle at 3 a.m. What do you want? Where are you trying to go? No answer. Obviously. But holding it, I noticed something I'd missed in 4 years of returns. The bone was warm, not sun-warmed. The sun had been down for 8 hours. Not body heat warm from my hands, I just picked it up, but warm like it had been sitting near a fire, like it retained heat from some internal source. I returned it to Tomb 7. By morning, it was gone. I found it 2 days later, at the base of a specific waka, a ceremonial mound, about 1 kilometer north of the cemetery. The mandible was positioned upright, teeth pressed into sand as if trying to dig or speak into the earth. I researched that waka, found references in archaeological surveys. It's a burial mound, yes, but also something else. The pre Columbian people used it for ancestor worship, a place where the living spoke to the dead, where offerings were made, where communication between worlds supposedly occurred. The mandible has appeared at that waka 7 times since then, always at the base, always positioned the same way, always warm when I find it. I stopped returning it last month, just left it there, photographed it, logged the location, walked away. 3 days later, it was back in Tomb 7, reunited with its skull. I don't know who returned it. The logs show no visitors to that section. The cameras show nothing, just empty frames where someone or something moves unseen. Last week, I found something else. A small depression in the sand at the waka's base, exactly where the mandible keeps appearing, as if the bone has been digging, slowly, persistently, making progress measured in millimeters per appearance. The depression is now 4 centimeters deep, perfectly circular, the size of the mandible's interior curve. I brought excavation tools yesterday, carefully removed sand from that depression, found something at 6 centimeters depth. Textile fragments, same weave pattern as the burial wrappings in Tomb 7. And beneath them, more bone, small fragments, finger bones, maybe toe bones, scattered pieces that match the skull's age and preservation. The mandible isn't lost. It's searching, digging, trying to reach the rest of itself, buried separately 1,000 years ago. Grave robbers took the skull and jaw to Tomb 7, but the hands and feet remained here, at the huaca, where offerings were made. I've stopped interfering. The mandible can travel if it wants, can dig if it needs to, can make its slow progress toward reunion with the scattered fragments of a body that's been incomplete for a millennium. I just document now, log its appearances, photograph the deepening depression, measure progress. Last night, I found it at the waka again, positioned in the depression, which is now 9 centimeters deep. The mandible was still warm, and around it, arranged in a careful circle, were the finger bones I'd found, as if the jaw had brought them up, gathered them, started reassembling what grave robbers had scattered. I sat nearby for an hour, watched, waited, saw nothing, just bone and sand and darkness. But when I returned to check before dawn, the arrangement had changed. The finger bones were closer together, more organized, positioned as they would have been in life, connected, articulated, forming the structure of a hand. Something is assembling itself, slowly. I don't know what happens when it's complete. When all the scattered fragments of this 1,000-year-old body finally reunite at the waka, where offerings were made and communication with the dead was performed. But I'm documenting everything, measuring the depression's depth, photographing the bone arrangements, logging every appearance and displacement. Because I've realized something. The mandible isn't random. It's not wandering. It's working, bringing the pieces home, to the huaca, to the place where the living and dead spoke to each other, where communication was possible. And when the last bone is retrieved, when the body is whole again, maybe it will finally speak. Maybe it will tell us what it's been trying to say for 1,000 years, using the only voice it has left: movement, displacement, the slow gathering of scattered self. Tonight, I'll patrol as usual, check Tomb 7, drive to the waka, Document whatever progress has been made. The mandible will be gone from the tomb, I'm certain, and at the waka, in that deepening depression, I'll find it again. Digging, gathering, speaking in the only language ancient bones remember, and I'll listen, because after 14 years of security work, I've learned something essential. The dead don't rest, they work, and this one has been working for a millennium, bringing itself home, piece by piece, one displacement at a time. The flowers appear on days the crypt is closed, and they're always slightly wilted. My name is Sophia Laurent, and I have worked as curator at the Catacombs de Paris for 18 years. I maintain the ossuary displays, manage visitor access, preserve the delicate balance between historical site and tourist attraction. The catacombs hold the remains of approximately 6 million people, most transferred here in the late 1700s when Paris's cemeteries became overcrowded and disease-ridden. Visitors often leave flowers, tokens of respect, memorial offerings, small acknowledgments of the dead. We allow this in designated areas, remove them weekly, maintain the space according to heritage preservation protocols. But one skull receives flowers we never authorized, never saw placed, never can explain. The skull sits in the southern gallery, third alcove from the entrance, eye level in a wall of carefully arranged remains. The catalog identifies it only as young female, approximately 17 to 22 years old, died 1789. No name, no family record. Just another anonymous victim of revolution, disease, or poverty. Fresh roses appear beside her every 2 to 3 weeks, always red, always recently cut, always positioned carefully, as if placed by someone who cared deeply about presentation. I first noticed them 6 years ago during routine inspection. 3 perfect red roses, wrapped in simple paper, leaning against the alcove wall, fresh enough that water still beaded on the petals. I removed them, assuming a visitor had left them despite the prohibition against offerings in that section. Documented the incident, reminded staff to watch for rule violations. The next week, 3 more roses appeared. Same position, same presentation, same impossible freshness. I checked the visitor logs. The catacombs had been closed for 2 days before I found them. No public access, no private tours. No one should have been in that section except security and maintenance staff. I questioned everyone. No one admitted to placing flowers. No one had seen anything unusual. The roses kept appearing, always when the catacombs were closed, always in that specific alcove, always 3 red roses, carefully positioned, impossibly fresh. I installed a camera, discreet, hidden among the ossuary decorations. If someone was accessing the catacombs illegally, I wanted documentation. The footage showed nothing. Empty alcove at closing, same empty alcove at opening, and between those moments, in a single frame transition, the roses appeared. No person, no movement, just flowers manifesting between heartbeats. I reviewed the footage with our security director. He suggested camera malfunction, corrupted files, technical glitch, all reasonable explanations that didn't account for the physical flowers sitting in that alcove, real and present and impossible. I researched the skull, tried to identify her, give her a name, understand why she alone receives these offerings. The records are sparse. 1789 was chaotic, revolutionary, violent. Thousands died. Most went unnamed into mass graves, later transferred to the catacombs without individual documentation. But I found a reference, brief notation in a church record. A young woman, executed during the terror, buried in an unmarked grave. The entry listed her crime: hiding a priest, sheltering an enemy of the revolution. Her name, Rosemarie Duchamp, 17 years old. Rose. Her name was Rose, and someone has been bringing roses to her for over 200 years. I started examining the flowers more carefully. The paper wrapping is old-fashioned, hand-tied, the kind you'd see in historical paintings. The roses themselves are heritage varieties, the kind that grew in 1700s gardens, not modern hybrids. I saved one, pressed it, preserved it, sent a sample to a botanist. The analysis confirmed it. Rosa gallica, an old French variety common in the late 18th century. The rose of Marie Antoinette's gardens, the rose of revolutionary France, the kind of rose that hasn't been commercially available for decades. Someone is bringing 200-year-old roses to a 17-year-old girl who died hiding a priest during the terror. I've stopped removing them, started documenting instead, photographing each appearance, noting the exact positioning, measuring the freshness. The roses are always slightly wilted when I find them, not dead, not dried, but aged, as if they've been sitting there for hours, even though the camera shows them appearing instantaneously. 3 weeks ago, I found something new with the roses. A note, small, folded paper, tucked among the stems. The handwriting was antique. Formal script, the paper aged and fragile. The message in French, Pour ma sœur qui m'a sauvé. For my sister, who saved me. The priest, Rosemarie's hidden priest, still leaving flowers for the girl who sacrificed herself to protect him. Still grateful after 236 years. Still remembering. I researched further. Found the priest's name in execution records, Father Michel Duchamp. Same surname. Her brother. He was a priest, she was his sister, and when the revolutionaries came for him, she hid him at the cost of her own life. The records show he escaped to Belgium, lived there for 43 years, died in 1832, age 69, buried in a monastery garden, his grave marked with roses. But somehow, he's still bringing flowers to his sister, still crossing whatever boundary separates death from devotion, still ensuring she's not forgotten among the 6 million nameless dead. I've started leaving space for the roses, cleared the alcove slightly, created room for the offerings. I don't remove them anymore. I let them wilt naturally, let them fade, let each set complete its cycle before the next appears. Last week, the note changed. Same handwriting, same aged paper, new message. Merci de tes souvenirs d'elle. Thank you for remembering her. Addressed to me, to anyone who's noticed, to whoever is finally paying attention to one girl among millions. I created a small placard, placed it beside the skull. It reads, Rosemarie Duchamp died 1789, age 17. She hid her brother at the cost of her life. She is remembered. The next morning, I found 4 roses instead of 3, and the note said simply, Pay, peace. I don't understand how this happens. Don't understand the mechanism by which a dead priest delivers flowers to a dead sister. Don't understand how devotion persists beyond death, beyond centuries, beyond every rational boundary. But I've stopped questioning, started accepting. The roses appear, I document them. I ensure Rosemarie's name stays visible. I make sure she's not just another anonymous skull in a wall of 6 million. Yesterday, a visitor stopped at that alcove, read the placard, asked me about Rosemarie's story. I told her everything: the hiding, the sacrifice, the execution, the brother who still brings roses. The visitor cried, left her own flower, a single red rose, purchased from a vendor outside the catacombs, placed it carefully beside the three that had appeared that morning. This morning, I found 5 roses, 3 old variety Gallicas, impossibly fresh and slightly wilted, and 2 modern roses, commercial variety, still crisp, the living and the dead, bringing flowers together, sharing grief across centuries, maintaining memory in the only way that matters: presence, attention, acknowledgement that a name existed, a life mattered, a sacrifice deserves remembrance. I'm curator here. I maintain this space. I preserve these bones. But I've learned something Rosemarie and Father Michel have been teaching me for 6 years. The dead don't want forgetting. They want witness. They want someone to know their names, their stories, their moments of courage or love or sacrifice. And when someone remembers, when someone acknowledges, when someone ensures they're not just anonymous bones in endless walls, the dead respond with roses, with notes, with gratitude that persists beyond death. Rosemarie Duchamp died in 1789. She's been dead for 236 years, but she's still receiving roses from her brother, still being remembered, still teaching us that love doesn't end when the heart stops. It just finds new ways to bloom, new ways to speak, new ways to ensure that among 6 million nameless dead, one name stays lit, one story stays told, one girl who hid her brother stays remembered forever.